Interpretation refers to the process of making sense of information, observations, or evidence by analyzing, understanding, and assigning meaning to them. It involves examining the significance, implications, and underlying patterns or relationships embedded within the data or observations. Interpretation plays a crucial role in critical thinking by enabling individuals to extract relevant insights, discern patterns, and derive coherent conclusions from complex or ambiguous information. Here's a detailed explanation of interpretation in the context of critical thinking. Purpose. The primary purpose of interpretation in critical thinking is to derive meaning, understanding, or insight from information, observations, or evidence. Interpretation helps individuals make sense of complex or ambiguous situations, uncover underlying patterns or relationships, and discern implications or consequences. It facilitates deeper understanding, informed decision-making, and effective problem-solving by enabling individuals to extract relevant insights and draw coherent conclusions. Process. Interpretation involves the following key steps. Begin by observing or gathering relevant information, data, or evidence related to the subject or issue under consideration. Analyze the information or evidence systematically, identifying patterns, trends, or relationships that may be relevant to the question or problem at hand. Consider the context in which the information or evidence was generated, including the background, circumstances, and conditions surrounding it. Seek to understand the underlying meaning, significance, or implications embedded within the information or evidence. Consider alternative interpretations and perspectives. Synthesize the findings of the interpretation to form a coherent understanding or narrative that explains the observed patterns or relationships. Reflect on the implications and consequences of the interpretation, considering its relevance, validity, and potential impact on decision-making or problem-solving. In critical thinking, interpretation can take various forms, depending on the nature of the information or evidence and the context in which it is analyzed. Some common types of interpretation include textual interpretation, analyzing written or verbal communication, such as texts, documents, speeches, or narratives, to uncover deeper meanings, themes, or messages. Data interpretation, analyzing quantitative or qualitative data, such as statistics, charts, graphs, or survey responses, to identify trends, patterns, or correlations. Visual interpretation, interpreting visual representations, such as images, diagrams, maps, or artworks, to discern underlying symbols, motifs, or messages. Contextual interpretation, considering the broader context, background, or socio-cultural factors that shape the meaning and significance of information or evidence. Intuitive interpretation, drawing on intuition, creativity, or insight to discern implicit meanings, connections, or associations that may not be immediately apparent. Interpretation in critical thinking is guided by various criteria or standards used to assess the validity, coherence, and plausibility of interpretations. Some common criteria include The interpretation should be directly related to the information, evidence, or observations under consideration. The interpretation should provide a logically consistent and coherent explanation for the observed patterns or relationships. The interpretation should be consistent with existing knowledge, theories, or principles in the relevant domain. The interpretation should be plausible and reasonable given the available information and the context of the problem. The interpretation should have explanatory power, meaning it can account for the observed phenomena or evidence in a meaningful way. The interpretation should have predictive validity, meaning it can be used to make accurate predictions or hypotheses about future observations or outcomes. Developing interpretation skills is essential for effective critical thinking. Some key skills and abilities include analytical skills, the ability to analyze and interpret information or evidence systematically, identifying relevant patterns or relationships. Critical thinking skills, the capacity to evaluate the validity, relevance, and plausibility of interpretations based on evidence and reasoning. Creative thinking, the ability to think creatively and generate alternative interpretations or explanations for observed phenomena or evidence. Cultural competence, sensitivity to cultural, socioeconomic, or contextual factors that may influence the interpretation of information or evidence. Perspective taking, the capacity to consider alternative viewpoints, interpretations, or perspectives when analyzing information or evidence. Interpretation is central to critical thinking because it enables individuals to derive deeper meaning, understanding, or insight from complex or ambiguous information, observations, or evidence, identify underlying patterns, trends, or relationships that may not be immediately apparent, enabling individuals to discern meaningful insights. Formulate informed judgments or decisions based on a coherent understanding of the implications and consequences of the information or evidence. Articulate interpretations clearly and persuasively, conveying complex ideas or insights in a manner that is accessible and compelling. Foster a culture of inquiry, curiosity, and lifelong learning by encouraging individuals to critically analyze and interpret information. Interpretation in critical thinking may encounter challenges such as ambiguous or incomplete information may make it difficult to arrive at definitive interpretations or conclusions. Individuals may be influenced by cognitive biases or assumptions that distort their interpretation of information or evidence. The tendency to interpret evidence in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses may bias the interpretation process. Interpreting complex or interdisciplinary information may require specialized knowledge, expertise, or analytical skills. The context in which information or evidence is interpreted may influence the interpretation process, leading to different conclusions. In summary, interpretation in critical thinking is the process of making sense of information, observations, or evidence by analyzing, understanding, and assigning meaning to them. By examining the significance, implications, and underlying patterns or relationships embedded within the data or observations, interpretation enables individuals to extract relevant insights, discern patterns, and derive coherent conclusions from complex or ambiguous information. Developing interpretation skills is essential for effective critical thinking, enabling individuals to navigate complex issues, solve problems, and communicate insights with clarity and rigor.